she lost her home in silence. But miles away, Bus 47 was hiding something no one else saw. The door closed behind her without a sound. No shouting, no fight. Just a quiet lock turning, as if her life had been finished and filed away. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk with a suitcase and a box of memories, and nowhere left to go. But somewhere beyond the city, across dust and forgotten roads, something from her past was still waiting, untouched, unnoticed, and not meant for anyone else. If you were in her place, what's the first thing you would do next? The door didn't slam. It closed the way careful people close doors, gently, deliberately, with a soft click that sounded almost polite. Then the lock turned. Evelyn Cross stood on the narrow concrete walkway, her hand still hovering near the door, as if she might knock again. But she didn't. She knew better than to knock on a door that had already decided not to open. The morning was just beginning to stretch itself awake. Pale light slid across the rooftops, catching on the edges of windows and the silver hoods of parked cars. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler clicked on, ticking back and forth in steady rhythm, spraying a fine arc of water over a strip of lawn that was greener than the rest. Evelyn shifted her weight. The suitcase in her left hand dragged slightly to one side. One of the wheels had been loose for years, and now it rolled with a faint, uneven scrape each time she moved it. In her right arm, she held a clear plastic storage bin. The lid didn't quite fit anymore. It bowed upward at the corners where it had been forced shut too many times. Inside were photographs, papers, a few envelopes she had never thrown away. Things that didn't belong anywhere else. She looked down at them as if she might have forgotten what she was holding. Her fingers tightened slightly around the rim of the bin, pressing into the plastic until it bent inward with a soft crackle. Behind her, through the door, there was no sound. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined the whole conversation. The calm voice, the careful words, the way everything had already been decided before she was even asked to sit down. You've stayed long enough. It hadn't been said cruelly. That was the part that lingered. No raised voice, no accusation, no anger she could push back against. Just a tone you might use to explain a policy or a deadline. Final, clean, finished. A car passed slowly at the end of the street. The driver glanced in her direction, then looked away. Not out of indifference exactly, just habit. People saw what they expected to see. A woman standing outside a house in the morning didn't look unusual enough to question. The mail truck came next. It stopped 2 houses down with a soft hiss of brakes. The carrier stepped out, already sorting envelopes in his hand. He didn't look up. Life continued. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the suitcase and took a small step forward, off the walkway and onto the edge of the sidewalk. The concrete was cool through the thin sole of her shoes. She hadn't thought to change them. They were still the same ones she wore around the house. Had worn around the house. The thought caught somewhere in her chest, but didn't fully land. Not yet. A breeze moved through the street, just enough to lift the loose strands of her gray hair and press them lightly against her cheek. It carried the faint smell of damp soil and cut grass. Ordinary smells. Familiar. She turned slightly and looked back at the house. It was the same as it had always been. Same pale siding, same narrow porch, same small crack near the bottom step where the concrete had shifted years ago. Nothing about it suggested that anything had changed. But it had. She knew it in the quiet. She knew it in the way her key sat unused in her coat pocket. She didn't reach for it. Instead, She looked down again at her hands. At the bin. At the way her fingers rested against the plastic, like they didn't quite belong to her. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, when her shoulders lowered just slightly. Not in defeat. Not exactly. More like something settling into place. As if her body understood before the rest of her did. Across the street, the sprinkler clicked again. Water struck the pavement in a steady, hollow rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Evelyn listened to it for a few seconds. Then she spoke, quietly. Not to anyone in particular. Bus 47. The words came out dry, like they hadn't been used in a long time. She paused. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, searching for something in memory that hadn't fully surfaced yet. If it's still there. The sentence hung in the air for a moment, then dissolved into the sound of the sprinkler and the distant hum of traffic. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her coat over her shoulder, though it didn't need adjusting. She lifted the suitcase just enough to straighten its angle, then let it settle again with that same uneven scrape. She didn't look at the door again. There was nothing left behind it that was hers. Not anymore. She stepped forward onto the sidewalk. And this time she didn't stop. The suitcase dragged behind her with that same uneven scrape, a small sound, easy to ignore. But it followed her, step after step, like something refusing to be left behind. At the corner, she paused. Not because she was unsure where to go. There was only one direction now, but because her body had not yet caught up with what had happened. Her hands still felt like they should be holding something else. Keys, maybe. Or a cup of coffee. Something that belonged inside a house. The street curved gently ahead. Trees lined the sidewalk, their leaves still holding the soft green of early spring. A breeze moved through them, light and steady. It sounded like quiet conversation. Evelyn walked. Her pace was slow at first, careful. She had learned to move that way over the years. Not to rush, not to draw attention. The habit stayed with her, even now, when there was no one left to notice. At the bus stop, she lowered the suitcase beside the bench and set the plastic bin on her lap. The lid shifted slightly when she touched it, making a faint snapping sound. She pressed it down again. There were already two people waiting, a man in a gray jacket, looking at his phone. A young woman with earbuds in, tapping her foot to something Evelyn couldn't hear. Neither of them looked up. That was fine. She sat quietly, hands folded over the bin. For a moment, she watched the road. Cars passed in short intervals. A delivery truck slowed, turned, disappeared. The world moved in small, predictable patterns. It always had. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass of the bus stop shelter, a thin outline, shoulders slightly curved forward, hair pulled back without much thought. She studied it for a second, then looked away. There had been a time when she stood differently. She remembered that. Not clearly, not all at once, just pieces. A front porch with chipped white paint, the smell of coffee drifting out through an open screen door. Her son, Daniel, leaning against the railing, younger than she could picture now, talking about plans that changed every few weeks. "I just need a little help to get started," he had said once, his voice full of something bright and urgent. She had believed him. Of course she had. The house on Willow Ridge had been small, nothing special, but it was hers. Every room held something that belonged to her life, furniture chosen slowly, over years, a kitchen table with a burn mark near the edge, curtains she had sewn herself. She sold it in less than a month. The paperwork had been simple, too simple, A few signatures. A transfer of funds. The real estate agent had smiled the entire time, speaking in reassuring tones about good decisions and family support. Evelyn remembered standing in that empty living room on the last day, her voice echoing slightly as she closed the door behind her. She hadn't thought of it as leaving, just moving. Temporary. That was the word she had used. She adjusted the bin on her lap again. Inside, beneath the photographs, there were still copies of those documents, sale records, bank statements, things she had kept without really knowing why. The bus pulled up with a low hiss of air brakes. The man in the gray jacket stood first. The young woman followed. Evelyn waited until they had boarded, then rose carefully, lifting the suitcase by its handle. The driver didn't look at her when she stepped on. She fed the fare into the machine, the bills slightly worn at the edges. The machine accepted them without hesitation. A small green light blinked. Approved. She moved down the aisle, her hand brushing lightly against the tops of the seats for balance. The bus smelled faintly of rubber and something chemical, clean but not fresh. She chose a seat near the middle, not too close to the front, not too far back. Habit again. The suitcase rested against her leg. The bin stayed on her lap. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Evelyn looked out the window. The street she had just left passed by in a slow glide. The house came into view for a moment, just the edge of it, framed between trees, then disappeared behind a turn. She didn't try to keep it in sight. There was nothing there for her anymore. The bus merged into traffic. The movement was smooth, steady, a quiet forward motion that required no effort from her. She exhaled. Across the aisle, a man coughed softly. Somewhere near the front, someone shifted in their seat. Small, ordinary sounds. Evelyn rested her hand on the lid of the bin. She thought about the years inside that house. Not all at once, just fragments. Standing at the sink, rinsing dishes quickly before anyone else needed the space. Folding laundry with careful precision, aligning sleeves and collars the way she had been shown. Waiting for the sound of footsteps before entering a room, then stepping back if voices were already there. Little adjustments, each one small enough to seem reasonable. Together, they became something else. She had told herself it was temporary, that she was helping, that things would settle. Time passed differently when you were waiting for something to change. Days folded into each other, weeks blurred. You stopped marking them. At some point, she stopped thinking about leaving. Not because she didn't want to, because she didn't know where she would go. The final conversation had been short. No raised voices, no accusations, just a table, 2 chairs, a stack of printed pages placed neatly in front of her. "You've stayed long enough." The words had landed without force, but they didn't move. Evelyn pressed her thumb lightly against the edge of the bin. She realized, sitting there on the bus, that the leaving had not happened this morning. It had been happening for years, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. The bus turned onto a wider road. The houses grew farther apart. Yards opened into longer stretches of grass, then patches of dirt. Evelyn watched it change. She didn't try to stop the memories anymore. They came and she let them pass. A kitchen light left on too long. A conversation paused when she entered the room. A glance that measured space, not people. None of it had felt like a single moment, but together they had led here, to a seat on a bus, to a suitcase with one broken wheel, to a plastic bin filled with things that no longer had a place. Evelyn leaned her head back against the seat. The vibration of the engine moved gently through the frame of the bus, a steady hum. Constant. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to rest them. And in that quiet, something surfaced again. Not a memory exactly. More like a direction, bus 47. The words settled into place more clearly now. She didn't know what she would find, or if anything would still be there. But it was the only thing that felt unfinished. The only thing that hadn't already been decided for her. Evelyn opened her eyes. Outside, the city was thinning. The road stretched ahead, open and long. She adjusted her grip on the bin, steadying it against her knees, and waited. The road stretched out ahead, long and unbroken. At first, the bus moved through the edges of the city, strip malls, gas stations, a row of identical houses with garages facing the street like closed eyes. Then, slowly, almost without noticing, things began to thin out. Fewer buildings, more space between them. The color of the ground changed too. Green gave way to patches of dry earth. The trees looked different, shorter, more scattered, shaped by wind instead of careful trimming. Evelyn watched it all through the window. She didn't track time, didn't check a watch. The movement of the bus was enough, steady, forward. A man got off at the next stop, then another. Seats emptied one by one until the aisle felt wider, quieter. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, filling the spaces where voices had been. Evelyn shifted slightly, adjusting the way the bin rested against her legs. The plastic had warmed from her touch. She looked down at it, then back out the window. Bus at 47. The words had come back to her clearer now. Not just a phrase, but something with shape. A memory trying to settle. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it come. It had been a Sunday. She remembered that much. The sky had been bright, too bright, the kind that made you squint even with your head turned away. Daniel had been young then, maybe 10, maybe 11, restless in the back seat of the car, tapping his fingers against the window as they drove farther than they usually did. Her husband, Thomas, had been in the driver's seat. Quiet, the way he got when he was focused on something. "We're almost there," he had said, more to himself than to anyone else. The road had turned to dirt. The car had rattled slightly over uneven ground. Dust rose behind them in a pale cloud. And then they saw it. The bus. Yellow once, though even then it had already begun to fade. Parked alone on a stretch of land that didn't seem to belong to anything. No houses, no fences, just open ground and a few stubborn trees. Daniel had laughed. "A school bus?" he had said, climbing out before the car had fully stopped. "What are we doing with a school bus?" Thomas had smiled, just a small one, the kind that stayed mostly in his eyes. "Thinking," he had said. That was his answer for a lot of things. Thinking. Evelyn opened her eyes. The present came back slowly. The bus she sat in now continued forward, carrying her farther from everything she had known. The memory stayed with her, though, clearer than it had been in years. Bus 47. She hadn't thought about it since Thomas died. Not really. It had slipped into the background, like so many other things. Something that existed, technically, but didn't belong to her daily life anymore. Until now. The bus slowed. The driver announced a stop, one she didn't recognize. A small town, maybe. A few buildings gathered close together. A diner, a hardware store. A faded sign that leaned slightly to one side. Evelyn didn't move. Not yet. She watched as the doors opened, then closed again. The bus pulled away. More miles passed. The land outside grew wider, emptier, The kind of space that made you feel both exposed and unseen at the same time. The sky seemed larger here. It stretched farther, uninterrupted by tall buildings or power lines. At some point, the driver spoke again, calling out a name she recognized. Not clearly, not at first, but something in the sound of it caught. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. The bus slowed, turning off the main road onto a narrower one. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. Dust lifted and drifted past the windows. She stood carefully, lifting the suitcase with one hand, the bin balanced against her side. The driver glanced at her this time. "You getting off here?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Yes." The bus came to a stop. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Evelyn stepped down, her foot finding the ground with a small, uncertain shift as her weight settled. The air felt different here, drier, carrying the faint scent of dust and something sun-warmed. The bus pulled away behind her. She didn't turn to watch it go. Instead, she stood there, taking in what was around her. A narrow road, a stretch of open land on either side. In the distance, a line of low hills, and off to one side, a dirt path. Faint, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the suitcase and started toward it. Each step felt deliberate. The ground was uneven, small rocks shifting underfoot. The suitcase wheel caught more often now, dragging harder, forcing her to lift it every few steps. She didn't rush. There was nowhere else to be. The path stretched ahead, curving slightly as it moved away from the road. The farther she walked, the quieter it became. The sound of traffic faded until there was nothing left but the wind and the faint scrape of the suitcase behind her. She stopped once to rest. Just for a moment. Setting the suitcase down, shifting the bin from one arm to the other. Her shoulders ached in a dull, familiar way. She looked out over the land. It felt unchanged. As if time had passed somewhere else, but not here. She picked the suitcase up again and kept walking. It took longer than she expected. The distance stretched in ways that didn't match how it had felt in memory. The sun climbed higher, warming the air. The ground seemed to rise and fall in small, uneven patterns. Then, she saw it. At first, just a shape, something out of place against the open land. Then clearer. The outline of a bus. Evelyn stopped. Her breath caught, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to hold her in place for a second longer than necessary. Bus 47. It stood alone, slightly tilted. The yellow paint faded into something closer to dust than color. Rust traced along the edges of the windows, spreading like thin lines of shadow. One of the tires had sunk slightly into the ground. It looked smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she had remembered it larger. Either way, it was there. Still there. After all these years. Evelyn let out a sound. A short, dry laugh that surprised her as much as anything else had that morning. Not because it was funny. Because it was real. She stepped forward again, slower now. The bus didn't move, didn't change. It simply waited. Exactly where it had always been. And for the first time since she stepped out onto the sidewalk hours earlier, Evelyn felt something shift, not into certainty, not into comfort, but into something steadier. She wasn't sure what she would find inside, or if it would be enough, but she had reached it. The last place left, and it hadn't disappeared. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, the wind brushing lightly against her coat, her eyes fixed on the bus, as if it might shift or fade if she looked away. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it was, waiting. She took another step forward, then another. The ground felt softer here, packed with years of dust and dry grass pressed flat by weather. The closer she got, the more details began to show themselves. The paint had peeled in long strips along the sides. The windows were clouded, not broken, but coated with a thin film that turned the glass into something dull and opaque. The metal around the wheel wells had begun to rust through in small patches, curling at the edges like old paper. She stopped just outside the door. Up close, it looked older than she remembered. Or maybe it had always looked like this, and she simply hadn't seen it before. Evelyn reached out and placed her hand against the side of the bus. The metal was warm from the sun. Solid. Real. She let her hand rest there for a moment, feeling the faint vibration of wind moving across the surface, then moved toward the door. It was still closed. The handle sat slightly crooked, angled downward more than it should have been. She hesitated, just briefly, then reached for it. The metal was rough under her fingers. She pulled. At first, nothing happened. The door held, as if it had forgotten how to move. Then, with a low, grinding sound, it gave way. The hinges protested, releasing a long, uneven creak that echoed faintly in the open space around her. The door opened inward. Evelyn stepped back instinctively, then leaned forward slightly and looked inside. Dust. That was the first thing she noticed. It lay across every surface in a thin, undisturbed layer. The seats, the floor, the dashboard, all of it carried the same soft coating, like something preserved rather than abandoned. The smell reached her next. Dry. Faintly metallic. Mixed with something older. Vinyl, maybe, or fabric that had been closed up too long. She lifted the suitcase, carried it up the steps, and stepped inside. The air felt different immediately. Still. Trapped. She paused just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust. Rows of seats stretched back in narrow lines. The aisle between them was clear, though scattered with small debris, leaves, bits of dirt, something that might have once been paper. The light came in unevenly through the windows, filtered and dull. Evelyn set the suitcase down near the front, then placed the plastic bin carefully on one of the seats. The seat dipped slightly under its weight. She looked around. Nothing moved. No sound, but the faint whistle of wind slipping through somewhere unseen. She took a step forward, then another. Her hand brushed lightly against the top of a seat as she moved down the aisle. The vinyl cracked faintly under her touch, stiff from years of heat and cold. She stopped halfway down. It didn't match. The thought came quietly, almost without words. Something about the space felt off. She couldn't say exactly what. Not yet. Evelyn turned slowly, looking from one side to the other. The layout was the same. The seats were where they should be. The driver's area was intact, the wheel angled slightly to one side. And yet, she walked back toward the front, her steps slower now, more deliberate. At the driver's seat, she paused. The steering wheel was coated in dust, but not evenly. There were faint streaks, as if something had once brushed against it, long ago. Or not so long ago. She leaned closer. The dashboard carried the same thin layer, but near the edge, just near the corner, there was a small patch that looked different, slightly darker, less settled. Evelyn straightened. It was nothing. Probably nothing. The bus had been sitting here for years. Wind, heat, animals, any number of things could have disturbed the surface. Still, she stepped back. The silence inside the bus felt heavier now, not threatening, just present. Evelyn moved to the side window and tried to open it. It stuck. She pushed harder. The frame shifted slightly, then gave just enough to let a narrow gap form. Air slipped through, carrying the dry scent of the land outside. She opened another, then another. Each one required a little more effort, a little more pressure, but eventually they moved. The air began to circulate, slowly, lifting some of the stillness. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then she went back to the suitcase. Kneeling down slightly, she unzipped it. The sound was loud in the quiet space. She paused halfway through, listening, then continued. Clothes, folded carefully. A small towel, a pair of shoes, nothing more. She took out the towel and shook it lightly, sending a thin cloud of dust into the air before laying it across one of the front seats. It would do. For now. Evelyn sat. The seat creaked beneath her weight, but held. She rested her hands in her lap and looked out through the windshield. The view stretched wide and empty. No fences, no houses, just land. For a long time, she didn't move. The events of the morning felt distant now, as if they had happened in another place entirely. The locked door, the quiet street, they belonged to a different rhythm, a different world. Here, there was only this. The bus, the wind, the slow passage of light across the ground. Evelyn leaned back slightly, letting the seat take her weight. "This is it," she said quietly. The words sounded strange in the open space, but they stayed. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to rest. When she opened them again, the light had shifted. Late afternoon. Time had moved. Evelyn stood carefully, her joints stiff from the stillness, and moved toward the back of the bus. Each step felt more certain than the last. She began to clear a small space, pushing aside debris, brushing dust from one seat to another. The movements were slow, methodical, something she could control, something she could do. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows through the windows. The interior of the bus changed with it, the light turning softer, warmer. By the time she returned to the front, there was a small area cleared. Not much, but enough. Evelyn picked up the plastic bin and set it beside the seat where she planned to rest. Her hand lingered on the lid for a moment. Then she let it go. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the side of the bus with a soft, steady sound. Inside, the air moved more freely now, carrying away some of the heaviness that had been there when she first stepped in. Evelyn sat again. She looked around. The bus was still old, still worn, still uncertain, but it was not empty anymore, not entirely. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes once more. The metal creaked softly as the temperature began to drop. The first night had begun, and she was still here. The air cooled faster than she expected. Inside the bus, the heat that had built up during the day slipped away in slow, uneven waves. Metal ticked softly as it adjusted to the change. The seats, stiff and dry, gave off a faint, dusty smell that grew stronger as the temperature dropped. Evelyn sat with her back against the front seat, the towel folded beneath her. Her legs stretched out along the narrow aisle. Not comfortable, not exactly, but steady enough. Outside, the land had gone quiet. No traffic, no distant voices, just wind moving low across the ground. brushing against the sides of the bus in long, soft passes. She kept her eyes open. Not out of fear, just awareness. Every sound felt closer here, sharper. The creak of the frame, the faint rattle of a loose window somewhere toward the back, the shift of her own weight against the seat. It took time before her body began to settle. When it did, it wasn't sleep that came first. It was stillness. A kind of listening. Evelyn turned her head slightly, looking toward the front of the bus. The steering wheel sat in shadow now, its shape barely outlined by the last of the fading light. She studied it for a moment. Then her gaze moved, slowly, carefully, across the rest of the space. Something still didn't feel right. She couldn't explain it. Not yet. But it stayed with her, a quiet sense that something here didn't match what it should be. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. She pushed herself up slowly, her knees stiff from the long day. The movement sent a dull ache through her hips, but she ignored it. She wasn't ready to sleep. Not yet. Instead, she walked. One step at a time down the aisle. Her hand brushed the tops of the seats again, feeling the cracks in the vinyl, the uneven texture worn by time. Each step stirred a faint trace of dust from the floor. At the middle of the bus, she stopped. The sound came again. Not loud. A hollow note. It happened when her foot pressed down near one of the seats, a soft, empty echo beneath the surface. Evelyn froze, then slowly shifted her weight back. The sound stopped. She stepped forward again. The same spot. Pressed down. There it was again. Hollow. Different from the rest of the floor. She stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle back in around her. Then she crouched carefully, lowering herself with one hand against the seat for support. Her fingers reached down, brushing the surface of the floor. Dust. Dry and fine. But beneath it, she tapped lightly. Once. Then again. Most of the floor answered with a dull, solid thud. This section didn't. It answered with space. Evelyn leaned closer, her eyes narrowing slightly in the dim light. It could be damage. Rot. A weak spot. That would make sense. Except, she shifted slightly, tapping along the edges of the same section. The sound changed. Solid. Then hollow. Then solid again. Not random. Defined. She sat back slowly. Her breath came a little deeper now. Not faster. Just more aware. She looked around the bus again, as if something else might confirm what she was beginning to think. The seats, the windows, the driver's area. Her eyes settled there again. The front. She stood carefully and walked back toward it. This time she didn't just look. She studied. The steering wheel, the dashboard, the paneling beneath it. Her hand moved slowly across the surface, brushing away a thin line of dust. That was when she saw it. A screw. Small. Set near the lower edge of the panel. It didn't match. The others were older, dull, worn down, their edges softened with time. This one, sharper, cleaner, different metal. Evelyn touched it lightly. It held firm. She glanced around again, instinctively, though there was no one there to see. Then she looked back at the floor. The hollow section, the panel, the screw. A line began to form. Not complete. But enough, she straightened slowly, her joints protesting the movement. For a moment, she said nothing. Did nothing. Just stood there, letting the pieces settle in her mind. Her husband's voice came back to her then, not as words, not clearly, but as a feeling. The way he worked. Quietly. Carefully. Fixing things without explanation. Changing things without announcement. Evelyn looked down at the screw again, then back at the floor. It wasn't damage. Not random. Not time. Something had been done here. On purpose. The thought didn't frighten her. It didn't comfort her either. It simply held. Evelyn turned and walked back toward her seat. She sat down slowly, her hands resting on her knees. The bus creaked softly around her as the night settled deeper. Outside, the wind shifted direction, brushing against the metal in a longer, steadier line. Inside, the silence felt different now. Not empty, not quiet, but waiting. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her eyes still open. She didn't try to solve it, not tonight. But she knew this. Something inside this bus didn't belong, and it wasn't going anywhere. Neither was she. The two things settled together in the dark, and for the first time since she stepped onto that sidewalk that morning, Evelyn felt something else take hold beneath the quiet. Not fear, not hope. Something steadier. Attention. The kind that doesn't let go easily. She closed her eyes again, slowly this time. The bus shifted gently in the cooling air. The hollow sound lingered in her memory. And somewhere beneath the surface of the floor, beneath the panel, beneath the dust, something waited. Morning came slowly. Not with noise, not with movement, just light. It slipped through the windows in thin, pale lines, settling across the seats, the floor, the steering wheel. It found the dust and made it visible again, every particle suspended in the air, drifting without urgency. Evelyn opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't familiar. The angle of the light was wrong. The silence was too complete. Then it came back. The bus, the land, the hollow sound. She sat up slowly. Her back protested first, then her knees, the kind of stiffness that didn't surprise her anymore. It simply announced itself and waited to be worked through. Evelyn placed her feet on the floor. The same spot. She pressed down. The sound returned. Soft. Hollow. Clearer now in the quiet of morning. She didn't move right away. Just stood there, feeling it beneath her weight. Then she stepped back. Carefully. Her eyes lifted toward the front panel again. The screw. Still there. Still wrong, Evelyn walked to the driver's area, slower than before, more deliberate. The air felt different this morning, cooler, clearer. The bus didn't seem as heavy as it had the night before. She crouched near the panel, her hand hovering over the screw. There was no tool, nothing obvious to use. She glanced around. The bus offered little. Old metal, broken plastic, a few loose fragments of things that had once been attached to something else. Her eyes settled on a narrow strip of metal near the floor, part of a broken seat bracket. She reached for it. Tested its weight. It would do. Evelyn positioned the edge of the metal against the screw and pressed. Nothing. She adjusted the angle, pressed harder. The screw resisted at first, then shifted slightly with a small, sharp sound. She stopped, waited, then tried again. This time, it turned. Slow, reluctant, but turning. Evelyn worked carefully, her movements steady, patient. The metal edge slipped once, scraping against the panel, leaving a faint mark. She repositioned it and continued. One turn, then another, the screw loosened. Finally, it came free. She held it in her hand for a moment, turning it between her fingers. New. Not recently new, but newer than everything else around it. She set it aside, then placed her hands on the panel, pushed. It didn't move. She paused, looked again. The edges. The seams. There, just near the corner, a slight gap. Evelyn pressed again, this time at the edge. The panel shifted. Barely, then more. With a soft release, it gave way. A narrow opening appeared behind it. Dark. Still. Evelyn leaned closer. At first, she saw nothing, just shadow. Then her eyes adjusted. And there, a shape. Rectangular. Metal. Set back just far enough to be hidden from any casual glance. Her breath slowed. She reached inside. Her fingers touched the surface first. Cool, solid. A box. She pulled. It didn't move. Wedged. Evelyn adjusted her grip, using both hands now. She braced one knee against the floor, careful not to shift her weight too quickly. Pulled again. The box shifted slightly. Dust fell from above, drifting down in soft lines. She paused, then pulled again. This time it came free. Heavier than she expected. She lowered it carefully to the floor. Sat back. Looked at it. A metal box. Worn. Edges scuffed. But intact. It didn't look like something forgotten. It looked like something placed. Evelyn wiped her hands on her coat without thinking, then reached for the latch. It was stiff, like everything else here. She worked it slowly. One side, then the other. Finally, it gave. The lid lifted with a low, dry sound. Inside, cloth. Carefully folded, wrapped around something beneath. Evelyn hesitated. Not out of fear, out of recognition. This wasn't random. She knew that now. She lifted the cloth. Beneath it, documents. Old, but preserved. Stacked neatly, bound together with a thin strap. And beside them, a small ledger. The cover worn, edges softened with use. Evelyn picked it up. Her fingers traced the surface. She opened it. The handwriting stopped her. She didn't need to read it. Not yet. She knew it. Thomas. Every letter precise, measured. The same way he had written grocery lists, notes, instructions for things he fixed. Evelyn sat very still. Then she began to read. Not quickly. Line by line. The entries were short. Dates, locations, numbers, references she didn't understand at first, but patterns emerged. Repeated names, coordinates, mentions of routes, access points. She turned a page, then another. Her brow tightened slightly as she read, her mind moving through the pieces, trying to align them with something she recognized. Then she reached for the documents, unwrapped them carefully. Land records, old ones, marked, annotated, lines drawn in pencil, sections circled. Evelyn compared them with the notes in the ledger, back and forth. Again, slower now, more focused. The connection formed gradually, not all at once, but clearly. Thomas had been tracking something, not just this land. Other pieces, connected, through routes, through access, things that didn't show up easily unless you knew where to look. Evelyn sat back, the box open in front of her, the ledger in her hand. The bus quiet around her. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't something left behind. This had been placed here. Hidden. On purpose. She looked around the bus again. The seats, the floor, the panel she had opened, the hollow space. It all fit now. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Evelyn closed the ledger slowly. Her hands rested on it for a moment. Then she placed it back beside the documents. Carefully. Exactly as she had found them. The wind moved through the open windows again, lifting a faint line of dust from the floor. The bus didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. Not by presence, but by intention. Evelyn reached for the lid of the box. Paused. Then Haas left it open. For now. She wasn't finished. Not even close. But one thing was certain. Bus 47 had not been waiting by accident, and whatever Thomas had left here, it had been meant to be found. Just not easily. Not quickly. Not by anyone. By her. Evelyn sat there a long time with the ledger resting in her hands. The pages were thin, slightly yellowed, but the ink, Thomas's careful, steady ink, had not faded. Each line still held its shape, as if it had been written yesterday instead of years ago. She didn't rush. She read again. Slower this time. Dates, coordinates, short notes that only made sense when she looked back at the documents beside her. Lines that crossed one another. Small arrows drawn in the margins. Not messy, never messy, but layered. Deliberate. Evelyn set the ledger down and picked up one of the larger sheets. A map. Not printed cleanly like the newer ones she remembered seeing in offices or stores. This one had been copied, then marked over by hand. Edges worn soft from being folded and unfolded again and again. Her finger traced one of the lines, then another. She compared it to the notes in the ledger. A point here, another there. The land this bus sat on wasn't isolated. It was connected. Not by roads you could see from a distance, but by access, by narrow paths, by something older than the lines that showed up on modern maps. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied it. She didn't understand all of it. Not yet. But she understood enough. This mattered. More than she had expected. The wind shifted outside, brushing along the side of the bus in a low, steady sweep. Evelyn closed the ledger and placed it back in the box, her movements careful, exact. She wrapped the cloth over the documents again, not tightly, just enough to keep them together. Then she paused. Her gaze lifted toward the front window. Something moved in the distance, not quickly, not close, just a change in shape along the horizon. Evelyn didn't stand right away. She watched. A vehicle, coming down the narrow dirt path. It hadn't been there before. The road wasn't obvious unless you knew where to look. Which meant, she rose slowly. Her joints protested, but she didn't rush them. The vehicle came closer, white, clean, out of place against the muted tones of the land. It slowed as it approached the bus, tires pressing deeper into the dry ground. Dust lifted behind it, hanging in the air before settling again. Evelyn stepped down from the bus. The sun had climbed higher now, the light sharper than it had been earlier. It cast clear edges on everything, on the bus, on the ground, on the man who stepped out of the vehicle. He closed the door gently. Not rushed, not uncertain, just practiced. His clothes were clean, pressed, the kind of neatness that didn't belong out here. His shoes left shallow impressions in the dust as he walked toward her. Evelyn didn't move. She stood where she was, one hand resting lightly against the side of the bus. "Mrs. Cross?" he said. His voice was calm, measured, not questioning. "Certain." Evelyn's eyes stayed on him. "Yes." He nodded once as if confirming something he already knew. "My name is Grant Halverson," he said. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Evelyn didn't answer that. Instead, she looked at the vehicle behind him, then back at him. "How did you find this place?" she asked. Grant's expression didn't change much. "It's my job to know where things are," he said, "especially land that hasn't been actively used in a while." Evelyn's hand tightened slightly against the metal beside her. The wind moved again, lifting a loose strand of her hair across her face. She brushed it back without taking her eyes off him. "This land is mine," she said. Grant inclined his head slightly. "Yes," he said. "I'm aware of that." There was a brief pause. Not awkward, not tense, just measured. "I'd like to make you an offer," he continued. Evelyn said nothing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He didn't hand it to her yet, just held it loosely between his fingers. "This area is beginning to change," he said. "Development is moving outward, slowly but steadily. Properties like this, ones that sit at certain intersections of access, they become important." Evelyn's eyes flicked briefly to the paper, then back to him. "Important to who?" she asked. Grant's mouth curved slightly. "To people who understand what they're looking at." The wind pressed lightly against the side of the bus, a low, steady sound. Evelyn stepped forward just once, not closer to him, closer to the ground between them. She looked down for a moment, at the dirt, at the faint lines where tires had passed. Then she looked back up. "You didn't come out here by accident," she said. It wasn't a question. Grant's expression held. "No," he said. Evelyn studied him. Not his face, his posture, the way he stood. Balanced. Certain. Like someone who had already calculated the outcome. She thought of the ledger, the map, the lines her husband had drawn, the connections. Then she looked at the paper in his hand again. "You can leave that," she said. Grant hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then stepped forward and set the paper on the edge of the bus step. "Take your time," he said. "It's a fair offer." Evelyn didn't reach for it. Grant glanced at the bus once more. His eyes moved across it, not with curiosity, but with assessment, measuring. Then he nodded. "I'll be back," he said. He turned, walked back to his vehicle, and got in. The engine started. The tires pressed into the dirt again as he turned the vehicle around. Within seconds, he was moving away, the dust rising behind him once more before settling into stillness. Evelyn stood there. The paper remained on the step. The bus stood behind her. The land stretched out in every direction. She didn't move right away. Then, slowly, she bent down and picked up the paper, unfolded it, looked at the number printed clearly near the center. Her expression didn't change. Not much. But something in her eyes sharpened. She folded the paper again, carefully, then turned and stepped back into the bus. The interior felt different now. Not quieter, not heavier, clearer. Evelyn placed the paper beside the open box, looked from one to the other. The offer, the ledger, the map. Two different understandings of the same land. One spoken, one hidden. She reached for the ledger again, opened it. Her finger moved along one of the lines, tracing it slowly. Grant had come here knowing something, but not everything. Evelyn could feel that now, in the way he had spoken, in what he had avoided, in what he hadn't said. She looked up toward the front window. The land beyond it no longer felt empty. It felt connected. And whatever had been left for her here, it was no longer just something she had found. It was something she would have to understand. Before anyone else did, Evelyn didn't touch the paper again. Not right away. Instead, she sat in the front seat of the bus, with the ledger open in her lap, the morning light stretching across the pages in thin, steady lines. The numbers didn't change. The handwriting didn't shift, but the meaning behind it felt closer now, clearer. She traced one line again, then another. The same coordinates that had seemed distant the day before now formed something more solid. Not just points, not just notes, a pattern. She closed the ledger and reached for the map. Unfolded it fully this time. The paper resisted slightly at the creases, then opened flat across her knees. The edges extended beyond them, forcing her to steady it with both hands. Evelyn leaned forward. Her eyes moved slowly across the surface, matching what she saw to what she remembered. The bus. This land. That much she could place. But the rest, lines drawn in pencil, small notations, faint marks that had been added and erased and added again. She compared them. Back to the ledger. Forward again to the map. Something shifted in her understanding. Not all at once, but enough. These weren't just markings. They were boundaries. Access lines, ways in, ways through. Evelyn looked toward the front window, toward the open land stretching beyond it. From here, it still looked empty. But it wasn't. Not the way she had first thought. She folded the map again. Carefully. Placed it back in the box. Then stood. Her knees tightened briefly before settling. She reached for the edge of the seat to steady herself, then moved toward the door. Outside, the air had warmed. The sun sat higher now, flattening the shadows and pulling more color from the ground. The dry grass shifted in small waves under the wind, and the path she had walked the day before was still visible. Faint, but there. Evelyn stepped down. She didn't go far. At first, just a few paces from the bus. Then she stopped, looked around, turned slowly. The land didn't speak in obvious ways. No signs, no markers, but she had something now. A reference. She turned back toward the bus, climbed up, and retrieved the map again. This time she held it differently. Not like something to read, like something to test. Evelyn stepped down once more and walked out a little farther, the map held loosely in one hand. She found a point, a cluster of low shrubs near a patch of exposed earth. Looked at the map, then back at the land. Adjusted her position, took a few steps to the right, checked again. The alignment wasn't exact. Not perfect, but it wasn't random either. She moved again. Another few steps. Stopped. Looked. This time the angle matched better. A line on the map. A faint rise in the ground ahead. Evelyn felt it. Not certainty, not yet, but direction. She followed it lowly. Her steps measured, each one placed with more care than the last. The ground shifted slightly underfoot as she moved away from the bus. Small stones rolled, the dry soil compressing beneath her weight. She stopped again, looked back. The bus stood behind her, still unchanged. Then she turned forward again. The map, the land. The two began to overlap. Evelyn moved for several minutes like that, walking, stopping, comparing, adjusting, until something else appeared. Not clearly, not at first, just a subtle change. The ground ahead dipped slightly, then rose again. A shallow line cut across the land, barely visible unless you were standing in exactly the right place. She stepped closer, looked down. The soil was packed tighter here, flattened, as if something had passed over it before. Long ago. Repeatedly. Evelyn crouched. Her hand brushed the surface lightly. Dust lifted. But beneath it, a firmer layer. She tapped it. Once. Then again. Not hollow, but distinct. Different from the surrounding ground. She straightened slowly. Looked at the map again. Then at the land stretching beyond the shallow line. Her breath came a little deeper now. Grant had known something, but not everything. That much was clear. He had come here for the land, for its position. But he hadn't walked it. Not like this. Not with this. Evelyn folded the map again, more quickly this time, and turned back toward the bus. Her steps were steadier now, more certain. When she reached the bus, she climbed inside without pausing and set the map beside the ledger. Then she reached for the paper Grant had left, unfolded it, looked at the number again. This time, it felt smaller. Not because it had changed, because her understanding had. Evelyn folded the paper again, placed it down, then sat. The bus creaked softly as she shifted her weight. Outside, the wind moved across the land in a long, even line. Inside, the air felt clearer, not lighter, but sharper. Evelyn picked up the ledger once more, opened it. Her finger moved across the page with more purpose now, tracing lines she had already seen, but now understood differently. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was confirming. Matching. Building something from what had been left behind. Piece by piece, line by line, the bus had held it, protected it, waited. And now it was hers to finish. Evelyn closed the ledger. Her hand rested on it for a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked toward the front window again. The land didn't feel empty anymore. It felt defined, structured, connected in ways that weren't obvious from a distance. And for the first time since she had stepped onto that sidewalk and walked away from everything she had known, Evelyn felt something settle into place. Not comfort, not safety, something else. Clarity. And with it, a quiet, steady resolve. She would understand all of it. Every line, every mark, every piece her husband had left behind, before anyone else had the chance to decide what it meant. She sat in the driver's seat as the light began to fade, the map folded neatly beside her, the ledger resting warm under her hand. For a long time, she didn't move. The land stretched out in front of her, quiet, open, unchanged, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Not the way it had when she first stepped off that road with nowhere else to go. She understood something now. Not just what Thomas had hidden, but why he hadn't told her. If he had explained it back then, it would have been his plan. His knowledge. Something she relied on. But this was something she had to notice. Had to question. Had to follow, step by step, until it made sense in her own hands. She looked down at the lines again, the ones she had traced across paper and then across the ground itself. No one had shown her where to stand. No one had told her what to see. She had found it. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass, steady and low, like it had been doing for years, without anyone paying attention. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her eyes still on the horizon. There had been a time when she waited for someone else to tell her where she belonged. When she thought losing everything meant there was nothing left. But sitting here now, in a place no one else had thought to look twice at, she realized some things aren't taken. They're just left behind until someone decides to see them. She reached forward and rested her hand on the steering wheel. The metal was cool now. Still, but not lifeless. For the first time, it didn't feel like she had arrived somewhere by accident. It felt like she had followed something all the way through. And stayed. If you had been the one standing on that sidewalk, with everything gone and nowhere to go, would you have known where to look next?